Welcome back, everyone, to Storytime with Belle. Sorry I've been gone for so long. The castle needed me. Mrs. Potts needed some help with the beast. Well, I'm back now, and it's time to continue our adventures with the Princess Bride. When we last left off, Westley and Buttercup had found their way towards the fire swamp, and Prince Humperdinck is still on their trail. Will Prince Humperdinck catch up to them? Will Buttercup and Westley get there happily ever after? Let's continue in The Princess Bride, Chapter 5, Part 6. Wesley, naturally enough, was considerably ahead of Buttercup with the realization that they were heading into the fire swamp. Whether it was a touch of sulfur riding, a breeze, or a flick of yellow flame far ahead in the daylight, he could not say for sure. But once he realized what was about to happen, he began as casually as possible to find a way to avoid it. A quick glance up the sheer ravine sides ruled out any possibility of his getting Buttercup past the climb. He dropped to the ground, as he had been doing every few minutes, to test the speed of their trackers. Now, he guessed them to be less than half an hour behind and gaining. He rose and ran with her, faster, neither of them spending breath in conversation. It was only a matter of time before she understood what they were about to be into, so he decided to beat back her panic in any possible way. "I think we can slow down a bit now," he told her, slowing down a bit. "They're still well behind." Buttercup took a deep breath of relief. Wesley made a show of checking their surroundings. Then he gave her his best smile. "With any luck at all," he said, "we should be safely in the fire swamp." Buttercup heard his speech, of course, but she did not take it well. A few words now on two related subjects. One, the fire swamps in general, and two, the Florin-Gilder fire swamp in particular. 1. Fire swamps are, of course, entirely misnamed. As to why this has happened, no one knows, though probably the colorful quality of the two words together is enough. Simply, there are swamps which contain a large percentage of sulfur and other gas bubbles that burst continually into flame. They are covered with lush, giant trees that shadow the ground, making the flame bursts seem particularly dramatic. Because they are dark, they are almost always quite moist, thereby attracting the standard insects and alligator community that prefer a moist climate. In other words, a fire swamp is just a swamp, period. The rest is embroidery. The Florin-Gilder fire swamp did and does have a particularly odd characteristics. A, the existence of the snowland, and B, the presence of R.O.U.S, about which a little bit more later. Snow sand is usually, again incorrectly, indefinite with lightning sand. Nothing could be less accurate. Lightning sand is moist and basically destroys by drowning. Snow sand is powdery as anything sort of talcum, and destroys by suffocation. Neither one sounds like a fun idea. Most particularly, though, the Florin-Gilder fire swamp was used to frighten children. There was not a child in either country that at one time or another was not, when misbehaving very badly, threatened with abandonment in the fire swamp. "Do that one more time, and you're going to the fire swamp," is as common as "clean your plate, people are starving in China." And so, as children grew, so did the danger of the fire swamp in their enlarging imaginations. No one, of course, ever actually went into the fire swamp, although every year or so a diseased R.O.U.S might wander out to die, and its discovery would only add to the myth and the horror. The largest known fire swamp is, of course, within a day's ride of Perth. It is impenetrable and over 25 miles square. The one between Florin and Gilder is barely a third of that size. No one has been able to discover if it was impenetrable or not. Buttercup stared at the fire swamp. As a child, she had once spent an entire nightmare year convinced that she was going to die there. Now she could not move another step. The giant trees blackened the ground ahead of her. From every part came the sudden flames. "You cannot ask it of me," she said. "I must. I once dreamed I would die here." "So did I. We all did. Were you 8 that year?" "I was." 8, 6, I can't remember." Westley took her hand. She could not move. "Must we?" Westley nodded. "Why?" "Now is not the time," he pulled her gently. She still could not move. Westley took her in his arms. "Child, sweet child, I have a knife, I have my sword. I did not come across the world to lose you now." Buttercup was searching somewhere for a sufficiency of courage. Evidently, she found it in his eyes. At any rate, hand in hand, they moved into the shadows of the fire swamp. Prince Humperdinck just stared. He sat astride a white, studying the footsteps down the floor of the ravine. There was simply no other conclusion. The kidnapper had dragged his princess into it. Count Rugen sat alongside. "Did they actually go in?" The prince nodded. Praying the answer would be no, the count asked, "Do you think we should follow them?" The prince shook his head. "They'll either live or die in there. If they die, I have no wish to join them. If they live, I'll greet them on the other side." "It's too far around," the count said. "Not for my whites." "We will follow as best we can," the count said. He stared at the fire swamp. He must be very desperate, or very frightened, or very stupid, or very brave. "Very all four, I should think," the prince replied. Westley led the way. Buttercup stayed just behind, and they made for the outset in very good time. The main thing, she realized, was to forget your childhood dreams, for the fire swamp was bad, but it wasn't that bad. The odor of the escaping gases, which at first seemed almost totally punishing, soon diminished through familiarity. Sorry, that word's a little bit of a tongue twister. The sudden bursts of flame were easily avoided because, just before they struck, there was a deep kind of popping sound clearly coming from the vicinity where the flames would appear. Westley carried his sword in his right hand, his long knife in his left, waiting for the first roost to appear. But none appeared. He had cut a very long piece of strong vine and coiled it over one shoulder, and was very busy working on it as they moved. What we'll do once I've got this properly done is," he told her, "moving steadily on beneath the giant trees, we'll attach ourselves to each other. So that way, no matter what darkness will be close by. Actually, I think it's more precaution than necessary, because, to tell you the truth, I'm almost disappointed. This place is bad, all right, but it's not that bad. Don't you agree?" Buttercup wanted to, totally. And she would have, too, only by then, the snow sand had her. Westley turned to look at her to see her disappear. Buttercup had simply let her attention wander for a moment. The ground seemed solid enough, and she had no idea what snow sand looked like anyway. But once her front foot began to sink in, she could not pull back. And even before she could scream, she was gone. It was like falling through a cloud. The sand was the finest in the world, and there was no bulk to it whatsoever, and at first, no unpleasantness. She was just falling gently through this soft, powdery mess, falling farther and farther from anything resembling life. But she could not allow herself to panic. Westley had instructed her on how to behave if this happened, and she followed his words now. She spread her arms and spread her fingers and forced herself into a position resembling that of a dead man's float in swimming. All this because Westley had told her to do, because the more she spread herself, the slower she would sink. And the slower she sank, the quicker he could dive down after her and catch her. Buttercup's ears were now caked with snow sand all the way in, and her nose was filled with snow sand, both nostrils, and she knew she opened her eyes, a million tiny, fine bits of snow sand would seep behind her eyelids, and now she was beginning to panic badly. How long had she been falling? Hours? It seemed that she was having pain in holding her breath. "You must hold still till I find you," he had said. "You must go into a dead man's float, and you must close your eyes and hold your breath, and I'll come get you, and we'll both have a wonderful story for our grandchildren." Buttercup continued to sink. The weight of the sand began to brutalize her shoulders. The small of her back began to ache. It was all agony, keeping her arms outstretched and her fingers spread like it was all so useless. When it was all so useless. The snow sand was heavier and heavier on her now as she sank it, always down, and it was bottomless, as they were thought when they were children. And was it bottomless as they thought when they were children? Did you just sink forever until the sand ate away at you, and then your poor bones continued to trip forever down? No. Surely there was somewhere there had to be a resting place. A resting place, Buttercup thought. What a wonderful thing. I'm so tired, and I want to rest, and... "Wesley, come save me!" she screamed, or started to, because in order to scream you have to open your mouth. So, all she really got out was the first sound of the word, "wah." And after that, the snow sand was drowned in her throat, and she was done. Wesley had made a terrific start. Before she started even entirely disappearing, he had dropped his sword and long knife and gotten the vine coil from his shoulder. It took him next to no time to knot one end around a giant tree, and holding tight to the other end, he simply dove headlong into the snow sand, kicking his feet as he sank for a greater speed. There was no question in his mind of failure. He knew he would find her, and he knew she would be upset and hysterical and possibly even brain tumbled, but alive. And that was, in the end, the only effect of lasting import. The snow sand had his ears and nose blocked, and he hoped she had not panicked. Just remembered to spread eagle her body so that he could catch her quickly in his headlong dive. If she remembered, it wouldn't be that hard. The same, really, as rescuing a drowning swimmer in murky water. They floated slowly down. You dove straight down. You kicked. You pulled with your free arm. You gained on them, and you pulled them. You grabbed them, and you brought them to the surface. And the only real problem then would be convincing your grandchildren that such a thing had actually happened, and that it was not just another family fable. He was still concerning his mind with the infants yet unborn, but when something happened that he had not counted on, the vine was not long enough. He hung suspended for a moment, holding onto the end that was stretched straight through the snow sand to the security of the giant tree. To release the vine is truly madness. There was no possibility of forcing your body all the way back to the surface. A few feet of ascension is possible if you kick wildly, but no more. So if he let go of the vine and did not find her within a snap, it was all up for both of them. Wesley let go of the vine without qualm, because he had come too far to fail now. Failure was not even a problem to be considered. Down he sank then, and within a finger's snap, he had his hand around her wrist. Wesley screamed then himself in horror and surprise, and the white sand gouged into his throat. For what he had grabbed had been a skeleton wrist, bone only, no flesh left to it. That happened in snow sand. Once the skeleton was picked clean, it would begin often to float, like seaweed in a quiet tide, shifting this way and that, sometimes surfacing, more often than journeying through the snow sand for eternity. Wesley threw the wrist away and reached out blindly with both hands now, scrapping wildly for some part of her, because failure was not a problem. Failure is not a problem, he told himself. It is not a problem to be considered, so forget failure. Just keep busy and find her. He found her foot more precisely, and pulled it to him, and then his arm around her perfect waist, and he began to kick with any strength left needed to rise the few yards to the end of the vine. The idea that it might be difficult finding a single vine strand in a small sea of snow sand never bothered him. Failure was not a problem. He would simply have to kick, and when he kicked hard enough, he would rise. And when he had risen enough, he would reach out for the vine. And when he reached out, it would be there. And when it was there, he would tie her to it. And with his last breath, he would pull them both to life. Which is exactly what happened. She remained unconscious for a very long time. Westley busied himself as best he could, cleansing the snow sand from ears and nose and mouth, most delicate of all, from beneath the lids of her eyes. The length of her quietness disturbed him vaguely. It was almost as if she knew she had died and was afraid to find out for a fact if it was true. He held her in her arms, rocked her slowly. Eventually she was blinking. For a time she looked around and around. We lived then? She managed finally. For hardly a breathe. What a wonderful surprise. No need, he was going to say. No need to worry, but her panic struck too quickly. It was normal enough reaction, and he did not try to block it out, but rather held her firmly and let the hysteria run its course. She shuddered for a time, as if she fully intended to fly apart. But that was the worst. From there, it was but a few minutes of quiet sobbing. Then she was Buttercup again. Westley stood, buckled his sword, replacing his long knife. Come, he said. We have far to go. Not until you tell me, she replied. Why must we endure this? Now is not the time. Westley held out his hand. It is the time. She stayed where she was on the ground. Westley sighed. She meant it. All right, he said finally. I'll explain, but we must keep moving. Buttercup waited. We must get through the fire swamp, Westley began, for one good and simple reason. Once he had started talking, Buttercup stood, following close behind him as he went on. I had always intended getting to the far side. I had not, I must admit, expected to go through. Around was my intention, but the ravine forced me to change. The good and simple reason, Buttercup prompted. On the far end of the fire swamp is the mouth of the giant Eel Bay, and anchored in the deepest waters of the bay is the great ship Revenge. The Revenge is the sole property of the dread pirate Roberts. The man who killed you. Buttercup said, that man? The one who broke my heart? The dread pirate Roberts took your life. That was the story I was told. Quite correct, Westley said. And that ship is our destination. You know the dread pirate Roberts? You are friendly with such a man? It's a little more than that, Westley said. I didn't expect you to quite grasp this all at once. Just believe it's true. You see, I am the dread pirate Roberts. I fail to see how that is possible, since he has been marauding for 20 years and you left me 3 years ago. I myself am quite often at life's little quirks. I myself am often surprised at life's little quirks, Wesley admitted. Did he, in fact, capture you when you were sailing to the Carolinas? He did. His ship Revenge captured the ship I was on, the Queen's Pride, and we were all to be put to death. But Roberts did not kill you. Clearly. Why? I cannot say for sure, but I think it's because I asked him please not to. The please, I suspect, aroused his interest. I did not beg or offer bribery, as the others were doing. At any rate, he held off his sword long enough to ask, why should I make an exception for you? And I explained my mission, that I had to get to America to get money to reunite with the most beautiful woman ever reared by man, namely you. I doubt she is as beautiful as you imagine, he said. He raised his sword again. Hair the color of autumn, I said, and skin like wintry cream. Wintry cream, eh? He said. He was interested now, at least a bit, so I went on describing the rest of you, and at the end, I knew, I convinced him of the truth of my affection for you. I'll tell you, Wesley, he said. I feel genuinely sorry about this, but if I'm going to make an exception in your case, news will get out that the dread pirate Roberts has gone soft. And that will mark the beginning of my downfall. For once they stop fearing you, piracy becomes nothing but work. Work. Work all the time, and I am far too old for such a life. I swear, I will never tell, not even my beloved, he said. And if you let me live, I will be your personal valet and slave for 5 full years. And if I ever once complain or cause you anger, you may chop off my head then and there. And I will die with praise for your fairness on my lips. I knew I had him thinking. Go below, he said. I'll most likely kill you tomorrow. Wesley stopped talking for a moment and pretended to clear his throat because he had spotted the first ruse following behind them. There seemed no need to alert her yet, so he continued to clear his throat and hurry along between the flame bursts. What happened tomorrow? Buttercup arched. Go on. Well, you know what an industrious fellow I am. Remember how I like to learn and how I trained myself to work 20 hours a day. I decided to learn what I could about piracy in the time allotted me, since it would at least keep my mind off my oncoming slaughter. So I helped the cook, and I cleaned the hold, and in general did whatever was asked of me, hoping that my energies might be favorably noted by the dread pirate Roberts himself. Well, I've come to kill you, he said, the next morning, and I said, thank you for my extra time. It's been most fascinating. I've learned such a great deal, he said. Overnight? What could you learn in that time? And I said, that no one had ever explained to your cook the difference between salt and cayenne pepper. Things have been very fiery on this. Things have been a bit fiery this trip, he admitted. Go on. What else? I explained to him that there would never have been more room there'd be more room in the holds if boxes had been stacked differently. And he noticed I had completely reorganized things down there, and fortunately for me, there was more room. Finally, he said, very well. You can be my valet for a day. I never had a valet before. Probably I won't like it, so I'll kill you in the morning. Every night for the next year, he always said something like that to me. Thank you for everything, Wesley. Good night now. I'll probably kill you in the morning. By the end of the year, of course, we were more than valet and master. He was a pudgy little man, not at all fierce as you would expect the dread pirate Roberts to be, and I like to think he was fond of me as I of him. But then, I had learned, really, quite a great deal about sailing and hand-fighting and fencing and throwing the long knife, and had never been as an excellent physical condition. At the end of 1 year, my captain said to me, enough of this valet business. Wesley, from now on you are my second in command, he said. Thank you, sir, but I could never be a pirate. And he said, you want to get back to that autumn-haired creature of yours, don't you? And I didn't even bother answering that. A good year or two of piracy, and you'll be rich, and back you go, he said. Your men have been with you for years, and they aren't rich. And he said, that's because I'm not the captain. And I'm going to retire soon, Wesley. And the revenge will be yours. I must admit, beloved, I weakened a bit there. But we reached no final decision. Instead, he agreed to let me assist in the next few captures and say how I like it, which I did. There was another ruse following them, flanking them as they moved. Buttercup saw them now. Wesley? Shh. It's all right. I'm watching them. Shall I finish? Will it take your mind off them? You help them with the next few captures, Buttercup said, to see if you liked it. Westley dodged a sudden burst of flame, shielded Buttercup from the heat. Not only did I like it, but it turned out I was talented as well. So talented that Roberts said to me one April morning, "Westley, the next ship is yours. Let's see how you do." That afternoon we spotted a fat Spanish beauty loaded for Madrid. I sailed up close. They were in panic. "Who is it?" the captain cried. "Westley," I told him. "Never heard of you," he cried. And that was when they opened fire. Disaster. They had no fear of me at all. I was so flustered I did everything wrong. And as soon as they got away, I was, do I have to add, disheartened. Roberts called me to his cabin. I slunk in like a whipped boy. "Buck up," he told me, and he closed his door and we were quite alone. "Did I tell you? What I am about to tell you I have never told anyone before, and you must guard it closely." I, of course, said I would. I am not the Dread Pirate Roberts. He said, "My name is Ryan. I inherited this ship from the previous Dread Pirate Roberts, just as you will inherit it from me. The man I inherited from it was not the real Dread Pirate Roberts either. His name was Cumberbound. The original Dread Pirate Roberts has been retired 15 years and has lived like a king in Patagonia." Confessed my confusion. "It's really very simple," Ryan explained. "After several years, the original Pirate Roberts was so rich he wanted to retire. Clooney was his friend and first mate, so he gave the ship to Clooney, who was an identical experience to yours. The first ship he attempted to board nearly blew him out of the water. So Roberts, realizing the name was a thing that clearly inspired the necessary fear, sailed their revenge to port, changed crews entirely, and Clooney told everyone he was the Dread Pirate Roberts. And who was to know he was not? When Clooney retired rich, he passed the name to Cumberbound to me, and I, Felix Raymond Ryan of Bootle outside Liverpool, now dub thee Westley, the Dread Pirate Roberts. All we need is to land, take on some new young pirates. I will sail along for a few days as Ryan, your first mate, and you will tell everyone about my years with you, the Dread Pirate Roberts. Then you will let me off, and they will all be believers, and the waters of the world are yours." Leslie smiled at Buttercup. So you know. You should also realize why it is foolish to be afraid." "But I am afraid." "We will all be happy in the end. Consider, a little over 3 years ago, you were a milkmaid, and I was a farm boy. Now you are almost a queen, and I rule uncontested on the water. Surely, such individuals were never intended to die in a fire swamp. How can you be so sure?" "Well, because we're together, hand in hand, in love." "Ah, yes," Buttercup said. "I keep forgetting that." Both her words and her tone were a stifle standoffish, something Westley surely would have noticed had not R.O.U.S attacked him from the tree branch, sinking its giant teeth in his unprotected shoulder, forcing him to earth in a very unexpected spurt of blood. The other two had been following, launched their attack, then too, ignoring Buttercup, driving forward to their hungry strength to Westley's bleeding shoulder. Any discussion of R.O.U.S, which, by the way, is rodents of unusual size, must begin with the South American capybara, which has been known to reach the weight of 150 pounds. They are nothing but water hogs, however, and present very little danger. The largest pure rat is probably the Tasmanian, which has never actually weighed at 100 pounds. But they have a little agility, tending to sloth where they reach full length, and most Tasmanian herdsmen have learned to avoid them. The fire swamp is a pure rat strain, weighing usually 80 pounds, and the speed of wood wolves wolfhounds. They are also carnivorous and capable of frenzy. The rats struggled with each other. To reach Wesley's wound. Their enormous front teeth had torn at the unprotected flesh of his left shoulder. He had no idea if Buttercup was already half devoured. He only knew that if he didn't do something desperate right then and there, she soon would be. So he intentionally rolled his body into a spurt of flame. His clothes began to burn, that he expected, but more important, the rats shied away from the heat and the flames for just an instant. That was enough for him to reach and throw his long knife at the heart of the nearest beast. The other two, instantly on their own kind, turned instantly on their own kind and began eating it while it was still screaming. Wesley had his sword by then. And with two great thrusts, the trio of rats were disposed of. "Hurry!" he shouted to Buttercup, who stood frozen where she had been when the first rat landed. "Bandages! Bandages!" Wesley cried. "Make me some bandages or we die!" And with that, he rolled onto the ground, tore off his burning clothes, and set to work kicking mud into the deep wound in his shoulder. "They're like sharks, blood creatures. It's blood they thrive on." He smeared more and more mud in his wound. "We must stop my bleeding, and we must cover the wound so they do not smell it. If they don't smell blood, we'll survive. If they do, we're for it. So help me, please." Buttercup ripped her clothes into patches and ties, and they worked on the wound, caking the blood with mud from the floor of the fire swamp and benching and rebenching it over it. "Well, no, soon enough," Wesley said, because two more rats were watching them. Wesley stood sword in hand. "They charge. They smell it," he whispered. The giant rat stood watching. "Come," Wesley whispered. Two more rats joined the first pair. Without warning, Wesley's sword flashed, and the nearest rat was bleeding. The three others contented themselves with that for a while. Wesley took Buttercup's hand, and again they started to move. "How bad are you?" she said. "I'm in something close to agony, but we can talk about that later. Hurry now." They hurried. They had been in the fire swamp for an hour, and it turned out to be easiest one of the, if they had one of the 6 it took to cross it. But they crossed it, alive, together, very much in hand. It was nearly dusk when they saw the great ship Revenge far out in the deepest part of the bay. Wesley, still within the confines of the fire swamp, sank, beaten to his knees. Between him and his ship were a few more inconveniences. From the north sailed in half the great armada. From the south, now the other half. 100 mounted horsemen, armored and armed. In front of them, the Count, now alone in front of all, 4 whites, and the prince astride the leader. Wesley stood. "It took too long in crossing. The fault is mine." "I accept your surrender," the prince said. Wesley held Buttercup's hand. "No one is surrendering," he said. "You're acting silly," the prince said. "I credit you with bravery." "Don't make yourself a fool." "What is foolish about winning?" Wesley wanted to know. "In my opinion, that is in order to capture us. You will have to come into the fire swamp. We've spent many hours here now. We know the snow sand waits. I doubt that you or your men will be too anxious to follow us. In here, and by morning we will have slipped away." "I doubt that somehow," said the prince as he gestured to the sea. Half the armada had begun to give chase to the great ship Revenge, and the Revenge alone was sailing as it had to away. "Surrender," the prince said. "It will not happen." "Surrender!" the prince shouted. "Death first!" Wesley roared. "Will you promise not to hurt him?" Buttercup whispered. "What was that?" the prince said. "What was that?" Wesley said. Buttercup took a step forward and said, "If we surrender freely and without struggle, if life returns to what it was one dusk ago, Will you swear not to hurt this man?" Prince Humperdinck raised his right hand. "I swear on the grave of my soon-to-be dead father and the soul of my already dead mother that I shall not hurt this man, and if I do, may I never hunt again, though I live 1,000 years." Buttercup turned to Westley. "There," she said. "You can't ask for more than that, and that is the truth." "The truth," Wesley said, "is you would rather live with your prince than die with your love." "I would rather live than die, I admit it." "We are talking of love, madam." There was a long pause. Then Buttercup said it. "I can live without love." And with that, she left Wesley alone. Prince Humperdinck watched as she began to the long cross to him. "When we are out of sight," he said to Count Rugen, "take the man in black and put him in the 5th level of the Zoo of Death." The Count nodded. "For a moment, I believed you when you swore." "I spoke truth. I never lie," the prince replied. "I said I would not harm him. But I never for a moment said he would not suffer pain. You will do the actual tormenting. I will only speculate." He opened his arms for his princess. "He belongs to the ship Revenge," Buttercup said. "He is—" She began about to tell Wesley's story, but that was not for her to repeat. "A simple sailor, and I have known him since I was a child. Will you arrange that?" "Must I swear again?" "No need," Buttercup said, because she knew, as did everyone, that the prince was more forthright than any Florinese. "Come along, my princess," he said to her. Wesley went away with him. Buttercup went away with him. Wesley watched it all. He stood silently at the edge of the fire swamp. It was darker now, but the flame spurts behind him outlined his face. He was glazed with fatigue. He had been bitten, cut, gone without rest, had assaulted the cliffs of insanity, had saved and taken lives. He risked his world, and now it was walking away from him, hand in hand with a ruffian prince. Then Buttercup was gone and out of sight. Wesley took a deep breath. He was aware of the score of soldiers starting to surround him, and probably he could have made a few of them perspire for their victory. But what was the point? Wesley sagged. "Come, sir," Count Rugen approached. "We must get you safely to your ship." "We are both men of action," Wesley replied. "Lies do not become us." "Well spoken," said the Count, and with one quick swing, he clubbed Wesley into insensitivity. Wesley fell like a beaten stone, his last conscious thought being of the Count's right hand. It was 6-fingered, and Wesley could never quite remember having encountered that deformity before. All right, everyone, we have finally finished Chapter 5 of The Princess Bride. If you enjoyed it, please continue to watch on. And if you didn't, well, sorry. My real name is Erika Short, and I am doing this as a way to help pass the time during this unworldly pandemic. And even then, when this is all over, I will still continue to read stories for all those who are always feeling like there's nothing else to do when they are alone, when they are trapped. Whether it's something as complicated as The Princess Bride or something as simple as Harry Potter, I hope to continue to read to you and give you guys a little bit of joy in your day. Enjoy, and stay safe, stay healthy.